Tell us more in terms of how providing Ukraine with fighter jets will change the course of the ongoing war.
Well, I think it's really important to look at it in the context of, other weapons that Ukraine has received. We saw just over about 6-7 weeks ago, Ukraine being provided with Patriot missile defenses. We saw, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, Ukraine being promised with modern tanks. So I think, if Ukraine was to receive modern fighter jets, that would really be sort of one of the final components that Ukraine needs to really bring its military up to modern standard. And I think, it's very difficult to fight a war if you don't have, let's say, air supremacy, or at least the ability to compete in the airspace. And at the moment, we've really seen for the past year, Russia really able to dominate the skies, not only with its fighter jets, but also with ballistic and cruise missiles. So the fact that Ukraine will have, or potentially would have, an additional layer of defense would be hugely significant in terms of both its defensive and offensive capabilities. Would mean that it'd be much easier for Ukraine to shoot down cruise missiles, which is currently very difficult to do on its MiG fighter jets. It would be much easier to provide air support to its ground forces, but also crucially, it could provide medium and long range attack capabilities for Ukraine, which of course it would enable some of those sites deep within the east of Ukraine, or even in Russia itself, to be struck. So I think, really in a whole range of different offensive and defensive capabilities, this would really, support Ukraine in its attempts to push Russia back to where the borders of Ukraine are.
Right, now the fighter jets will certainly give Ukraine an edge in the ongoing war, and Russia has clearly warned London against sending these fighter jets to Ukraine. But I want to ask you that what kind of political and military ramifications is Russia hinting at here?
Well, Russia really is trying to employ this leverage over the West, really every possible stage of the West's support for Ukraine. And of course, that is related to a whole range of different things. It has threatened very thinly veiled nuclear threats towards the West, which I don't think anyone really takes too seriously. But it's also to try to, of course, harness its natural resources, its dependency that the West continues to have over Russian oil and gas. So, I think generally the way that Russia tries to do this is through sort of ambiguity. It doesn't often say exactly what it would do to the West, but it tries to hint through trying to, increase the West's view of what escalation might look like. And as we know from statements really for the past 12 months, the West's priority is that actually this doesn't turn into a sort of NATO-Russia confrontation, but it maintains a Ukraine-Russia confrontation. So I think really, that's the biggest thing that the West fears. But I think ultimately, if the West is providing or willing to provide much modern equipment to Ukraine, it won't do on the basis that it does seriously think that there would be a chance that Russia would or act in a military way against the West. So I think, we could still see, further consequences in terms of Russia trying to shut, oil and gas from the West. But I don't think this specifically, at least the decision specifically, would lead to military confrontation. But it's possible that the military consequences of Ukraine receiving fighter jets would lead to some kind of escalation in events. But I say I don't believe the decision in its own right would actually cause some kind of Russian military back against the West.
The question on everyone's mind: when will the war in Ukraine end?
I think it's a very difficult question to answer, unfortunately. It could end tomorrow, frankly, if Russia decided to withdraw from Ukraine. But frankly, from the very beginning of this war, Ukrainians have shown that they are willing to pay a huge price and sacrifice to maintain the borders and the independence of their country. Unfortunately, they're facing a leader, a dictator, Putin, who is willing to inflict both huge harm to both Ukraine, but also to Russia itself. We've seen huge losses from, Russia. We've seen well over 100,000 military dead, and of course, huge economic cost for Russia because of the war. And I think the fact that Russia continues to attack Ukraine despite these huge costs really shows the determination from Putin that he is not willing to be sidetracked in terms of what he is trying to achieve. But I think also, in terms of the longevity of the war, one of the main problems is that Putin's sort of survival is now dependent on the outcome of the war. And if you have a sort of major defeat for Putin, major military losses, major economic losses, and really he's not able to present that in a way that shows some kind of Russian victory, or the Russians got something out of that, then he knows that he will face major domestic consequences for that, which he is not willing to face. So unfortunately, we are faced in a very difficult position where, Ukrainians, of course, understandably are completely unwilling to compromise their independence and their democracy and their freedom. And on the other side, we have a dictator who is ultimately prioritizing his own survival above the long-term peaceful interests of the continent.
Thank you, Mr. Schwarz, for joining us on Beyond this hour and sharing your insights on this. Thanks very much.
Good to be with you.